Runners can be pretty polarized when it comes to training in groups. Some people love the solitude of a solo run, while others thrive in run clubs or teams. Training groups are an effective way to get an extra push during workouts, or add fun to your training program. That's why so many elites choose to train together. Coach Jeff joins this episode to explain how you can use social runs to your advantage, even when everyone in the group has different goals or fitness levels. All it takes is a little intentionality and creativity to make your run work for everyone in the group. So let's jump to my conversation with Jeff to explain how. I have a super love-hate relationship with today's topic, which is all about training in groups. Jeff, where do you stand on this one?
I love it. I'll say that I'm a big fan of it. There definitely can be some downsides that you have to be aware of, but that definitely can be overcome. And I definitely love training with groups.
Yeah, I'm with you. I absolutely love it. My inclination is always, especially for hard workouts, to want to be with other people. But I still, to this day, I haven't decided whether it's actually beneficial for me or whether I'm better off training on my own.
No, there's definitely positives and negatives, and there's definitely things that can. There are definitely strengths to training alone. Like there's definitely some things that benefit you on that end, and there's also a lot of things from the group side of things that can benefit you as well. So excited to share my experience and some of the research and some of my own experience with training with groups.
Yeah, we'll get into more what you recommend for your athletes as well as what are the pros and cons of both. But from your own training, just because I know you were a competitive athlete yourself, what proportion of your runs do you think you actually did in groups versus solo?
That's a great question. I would probably say uh, probably 70% of my runs were with groups. That was, and part of that's including college, where it's kind of almost always a group run, and then even professionally, I was with the group for a good portion of my professional career. So I ran quite a bit with groups. Occasionally did solo runs, but those were usually just easy runs. Most of the workouts I did were with the groups.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the team thing because I think like when I was in doing high school running, probably 90% of my runs were in teams, but I find now, working a full-time job, trying to fit in big mileage training for a marathon, it's really hard to get in a training group, at least for more than maybe on the weekends when you're trying to find people who want to do the same run as you.
Yeah, absolutely. That can be one of the downsides of training groups is that sometimes they can be hard to fit into your schedule. It can certainly be one of those things that sometimes makes running a little bit more logistically difficult. So that can be sometimes of a downside for sure.
Yeah, and just kind of expanding on that drawback of like the logistics of trying to find a training group. How do you advise some of your athletes who prefer working in training to try to find those other people who might be able to work in with them?
Yeah, luckily nowadays there's a little bit easier to find groups in the sense that there's a little bit more visibility online than there was probably 10, 15, 20 years ago. But there's a lot of resources. So you can always, if you have a local running store anywhere within probably 30 miles of where you're at, they may have different, if you visit them, they may have different groups that are one that might be closer to you, not 30 miles away, but one that might be closer to you. And then they might also know like the online resources for groups that might be in your area. And so, likewise, I would also just do either through Strava or just Googling online if there's any running clubs in your area. You'll on Strava, you'll probably notice them kind of grouped together, or there may be even a group in your area that you can search. And then online, sometimes a lot of running groups will just post their stuff online. Sometimes you can, if you just even go to a running store and you just happen to be chatting with people, you may be able to start putting together I guess links of people like, okay, this guy knows somebody, this guy trains with somebody here, and like start to put together what the groups are around you. That's a great place to start. Depending on where you're at, there may be more available to you than others, and then that gets into your, I guess, how to like choose the right group kind of thing. But first is kind of looking at the available groups to you, and then, like you said, the next step would be deciding which ones fit you best.
Yeah, I think running clubs have made it so much easier to find people of all different skill levels and all different interests to train with. One of the struggles for me though is the majority of those run clubs, they happen either in the evenings or on weekends, and myself just trying to fit it around work. I tend to get up early mornings, and I think probably a lot of the athletes you work with do their runs in the morning before work or before caring for families. Do you think there's any way for those particular runners to try to find training groups if they find that benefits them?
Yeah, so there are groups that do meet in the mornings. I remember being when I was in Michigan, there were a couple groups that met in the mornings. You may also have to find just kind of like strike a balance where maybe during the week And a lot of people are probably going to be in your shoes where during the week it's a little bit, they're on a tighter schedule. They might not be able to drive to meet to a group run, etc. And so it might be the weekends where you're only able to meet with that group kind of thing. But there are groups that run in the mornings. The other thing I'll add about that I should have added with the group stuff is if there's not a group in your area, there may be a need for one. And so if you're somebody that likes to organize or just really excited about running in a group, you can definitely take it upon yourself to start a group. And you'd be surprised at how quick or how starting a group can really kind of catch fire. And it doesn't take long before you tell one friend, or you start running with one friend and they tell another, and the next thing you know, you've got a good little group going. And a lot of times, if you do it through friends of friends or friends of yours, generally speaking, you're probably all on the same ability level. And so not always, but sometimes. And so generally speaking, you can put together a small group of 3, 4, 5 athletes that can get together, every Tuesday, every Thursday, something like that, to do those weekday runs, weekday workouts that can really benefit you.
Yeah, and I think that piece around defining a time of the week is something that I've found helpful, even if it's not like a training group that really has a full structure set week of time. I find even with group of friends, it's helpful just because A, it keeps you accountable, but B, it's so much easier to plan than if you're kind of reaching out to each other spontaneously saying, hey, are you free after work? Stuff tends to pop up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I know the training groups outside of the professional groups I was in that were the most successful or the most consistent were really the ones that, generally speaking, I was in an area with a lot of runners in general. But we basically just designated a meeting place and a meeting time. So it was 6 a.m. every day at the same place. And so you kind of just showed up if you were able to make it. And because the area had a lot of runners, I would say every day there was at least 10 to 15 people. Some days maybe a little bit less, but just having the same day, same place kind of made it a lot easier for people to join when they could and then not feel guilty when they couldn't, and if I don't remember this ever happening, but if I had ever showed up and there wasn't anybody there, it really wouldn't have been it would just been like, okay, it wasn't too far from my house anyway, so I just go for a run by myself. So that can be a way to kind of initially just try setting it up if you're with somebody, or you're kind of with a group of people that are interested in branching off from the running club and that kind of thing. It could just be like, hey, if you're interested in doing it, we're going to meet 6 a.m. Here, close enough to everybody where they can get there, and then kind of just go from there, at least getting that started to being somewhat consistent with your group.
Yeah, the other thing I might suggest, and I don't know if this is something you've done with your athletes, but even kind of bridging the gap and doing some of it solo and some of it with a group. For example, if I have a workout plan, but I know there's a group I like to run with that's going for an easy run, I'll kind of tag along with them for the warm up or cool down, and then go off and find a loop to do the workout.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I used to do that a lot. Just my mileage was generally higher than a lot of people. And so that's what I would just run. I would take a longer route to the meetings place. So I probably had 2, 3, 4 miles in me before I hit the training group, and then wait 2 to 3 minutes for everybody to kind of get together. And then we shoot off and do the run that the 8-mile run that the training group was doing.
Yeah, at the risk of maybe feeding into a bit of toxic culture within running clubs, I find one of the biggest flexes is when you can show up and be the person who's run the furthest to get there. I find there's kind of a reluctance to actually drive to the run club. Everyone wants to run, even if you're 10 kilometers away.
That's funny. I've never experienced that, but I could definitely see how that could happen.
Oh, yeah. I find I've gone to run clubs where people have a 20-mile run plan, and there'll still be people in the group who will run another, 5, 6 plus miles just to get there and tack it on.
Yeah, like I said, I've done that, but at least for me, like I was always like just more focused on like what I was doing. And so if somebody else wanted to run more to get there, I'm just, hey, whatever floats your boat.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's, that I think is maybe one of the important mindsets to have when you train in groups. I think you really have to be able to separate yourself from what others are doing in a way that's maybe a bit easier when you are training solo.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, we'll probably get into this, but that's, one of the downsides is that you do have to pay close attention to like what you're doing, and making sure that even though you're running with the group, that you're at least trying to optimize that group training as much as possible for you, without interfering with anybody else's workouts.
Yeah, so just to get into that a bit more, what do you think are the risks if you're training in a group and you maybe get drawn in a bit to trying to do what other people are doing?
Yeah, so that's always the difficult thing. on a lot of different sides. So there's the side of, whether it be volume, doing adding on mileage just because that's what people are doing. And or like, so for example, you go to a group long run and you have 12-mile schedule, but the group run is 16. You may be tempted to jump into that 16. And for some athletes, that might not be such a big deal, but for some athletes, that may be, the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to say. So there's the volume side of things, and then obviously there's the pace intensity side of things. So anytime you join a group, there's definitely the temptation to try to stay with the group, and or I never suggest this, but to be the person that is always at the front or always pushing the pace, that kind of thing. So you just have to be really wary of that and remember to stay within yourself. And I always, for the athletes that we work with that train in groups regularly, what we recommend is always kind of go in with a plan for like how you want to adapt whatever the group is doing to you, that optimizes your training and still allows you to get the benefits from the group. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. But I think as long as you go in with a plan and have that mindset, then I would say that 90% of the athletes that we work with that have that plan and mindset going in are successful in groups. The ones that I think aren't successful, or that fall into the trap of running too hard, running too fast, running too far, are the ones that just kind of go to the group and just kind of do whatever the group is doing. And generally speaking, I can't speak for every group. I can only speak for the numerous ones that I've been a part of. I would say that everybody is pretty accommodating to what you might need to be able to do. So if you say, hey, I can only go this far today, I'm going to have to check off, peel off before you guys are done, or I'm going to have to do an extra rep or one less rep, that kind of thing. Like, most people are pretty accommodating, at least to the groups that I've been a part of. Everybody's there to have fun and have that camaraderie, but then also make themselves better. And so that's how I've always seen it, and that's how I've approached it. And I haven't really seen within groups too much of I would say that people being upset that you're not doing the whole workout or doing exactly what the group is doing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think I've either seen that situation where people get upset you're not doing what they're doing, but I think there's a bit of a paradox there in benefiting from training in groups, but a risk of it being to actually do what the group is doing. So what was your mentality training in groups when you were an athlete in terms of knowing what was best for you, and how that might actually differ from what the rest of the group or what other individuals within the group were doing if everybody had their own workout or training plan?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that gets into the idea of like having that plan of like what you're going to do. So I think there's two things. One is having a plan. And then the second part is just like understanding how you can adapt your workout to still get the benefits that you're going for or looking for, given the workout that the group is doing. And I would say in most cases, it's possible. So for example, if the group is doing a long run and you have to do something longer or shorter or longer, like there are usually pretty easy ways to adapt your training to accommodate that. If they're doing a specific type of workout, so let's say they're doing some type of threshold or something like that, there are ways that you can adapt your workout to do what the group is doing. So, what I've done in the past is I've had athletes start behind the group if they're going to do repeats and they're significantly faster or significantly slower, either starting ahead or starting behind the group. So that way, for the majority of the running with the group, but not the entire way, they give themselves some leeway there. If you're still after a particular volume, you can just do less repetitions. If you're doing, let's say, if somebody's doing a 6-mile tempo, you can do something like a 4-mile tempo, so you can still probably run with them. And just that because you're not doing the full 6 miles, the effort's less. So really it comes down to just understanding what your goal of the workout is, and then adapting the group's workout to what your goal is. And so there's a lot of different ways you can do that.
At the risk of asking a question that may sound really, really obvious, if one of the biggest risks of training in groups is being drawn to doing what other people are doing, and one of the greatest ways to combat that is to actually know your own plan and stick to it, why train in groups in the first place? And why not just go execute your workout on your own?
No, that's a great question. So there is still a lot that can be gained from training in a group, even if you're not doing the entire workout or the entire run with them. So there so for an example, some of the examples I gave you where you're doing half the workout or cutting off a couple reps, that kind of thing, you're still getting that the biggest benefit of a group that I found is that you have that camaraderie of working with other people. So as all of us know, like running can sometimes be a little lonely. There's definitely some joy to that. Like I enjoy the solitude of running sometimes, but a lot of times when it comes to that hard work, when you're really putting in the effort and it's like grinded out type of session, it can really help to have somebody else with you, kind of going through the same motions, warming up, cooling down, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of fun that can be part of that. So even if you're only doing half the workout, or if you had to modify some of it, you're still getting a big benefit from training with those other people, being around them, being motivated by their by their running, having somebody to just commiserate with between intervals, that kind of stuff. Again, if a long run, even if you have to cut off 3 miles or something like that, you still get 75 to 80% of the runs with other people. So there's can still be a lot of benefits there. That I think are the primary benefits of training with a group. I think the primary benefit of training with a group is just having somebody there to make the quote unquote the misery of doing that workout. And misery is an endearing. I use misery in the endearing term of a workout, a little less difficult. And so that's how I think the groups are the best. And so you can still get most of those benefits even if you're adjusting things to do your own thing.
Yeah, and then what about sense. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I found for myself, like I do think it's true that misery loves company, and there's something about being with other people going through the same thing that makes it a lot better. But I do think that one of the best utilizations of running in groups is even just getting an easy miles or longer long runs, and you're kind of taking out some of the suffering element there, but there's something about being in a group that still seems to make the run just more fun, more enjoyable, and bring out the best in you. What do you think it is about those runs when you're not actually suffering, where it still kind of can help you get to that next level to run with other people?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. So like I said, I do enjoy the solitude of running, but that can get old. Like if I did every single run all by myself, I would say that'd probably get old. I think we've all been, if we've ever run with a friend or run with a group, we all know that sensation of like you start the run and then all the next thing you know it's like over, like you just got lost in the conversation. So sometimes it's just that ability to get lost in the conversation, if it's an easy type of effort or a long run, something like that, like that is a huge benefit. Like those long runs where you're out there for 2.5 hours, like that can go by in a snap if you're just chatting and talking, that kind of thing. And then even with workouts, like you said, there are definitely times where it's like you're just grinding and you get through the interval, you get somebody during the rest period to kind of like chat quickly with, or kind of just be like, oh man, that was hard. And like just having that group there to push you can make it a lot easier and just make that workout go a lot quicker, or mentally get through stuff a lot easier.
Yeah, and can I add, one of the other pieces I think is motivating about it is putting your goals out there, even if you don't explicitly state it. I find there's something about being with other people who are chasing similar goals, or even just sharing those goals and motivations with, that I don't know, there's something there beyond just keeping that goal to yourself that really makes it feel worthwhile to push and get in all your runs and workouts.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And there was some research done about how writing down and sharing a goal, like it doesn't matter who it's with, but sharing a goal. I can't remember the exact stat on it, but it led to significantly increased chances of you accomplishing that goal. So that is one way to do it, is to be able to share it with people that probably understand what you're going through or what you're trying to do. So like, the problem with running sometimes is you share your goal with somebody that may not have any idea of what that is. If you share, let's say for example, your significant other doesn't run, you can tell them how much you want to qualify for Boston or how much you want to break 3 hours for the marathon or something like that. But they might not really understand what that means or the work that it takes to get there. Whereas if you share that with somebody that runs, like they're going to probably have a pretty good idea of what the significance of that goal is. And that sharing it with somebody that understands that can be a huge benefit. And like you said, with a group, there are just times where no matter what, you're just going to have times where it's difficult to push yourself through a workout or to push yourself as hard as you need to. and having somebody there that understands your goal, even if out loud they just say, hey, this is your last interval, let's make sure that we do it right to qualify for Boston, something like that. Like that can be a huge mental trigger in your head to like get you focused, to say, okay, I got to grind this out because I want to hit my goal. And if you were alone, you can say it to yourself, but sometimes having somebody on the outside say it to you makes a big difference.
Jeff, the whole conversation we've just had about kind of tapping into that next level and having extra motivation made me think of another question, which is really more so at the elite level. I think that for a lot of us, it can be a struggle to really have that motivation and push yourself to the next level. Whereas for elite athletes, I think most people would probably agree, whether they're running in groups or solo, these athletes know how to get the most out of themselves. They can run themselves into the ground if they need to. So if you have that kind of perseverance where you know how to reach your max potential, where do the benefits still come in of being able to train in groups? Because it does seem like a lot of these elite athletes still like to live and train together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. I would say most elite athletes, at least runners, are just programmed to be able to do that type of work by themselves if they need to. But that doesn't mean that it's not mentally taxing. And so I would say, as an elite athlete or former elite athlete, there you can definitely get through it, and there you can do it for a few workouts and even a couple training cycles, that kind of thing. But it does become a mental grind, and that mental grind can get difficult even for elite athletes. So anything that you can do as an elite athlete to make things easier on yourself is going to be a benefit to your training. So there's obviously the mental side of it, where just not having to grind every day like that can just make getting through that whole training cycle a lot easier, especially when you consider like elite athletes. I know as recreational athletes, we look at them and say, oh, they got it easy because they have all the time to recover. They can eat, sleep, and sleep and train running, that kind of stuff. And while that's great, there's a huge mental burden to that. There's also the mental burden of like this being your, like how you wrap yourself. That's like your being is running. How you make your money is through running. So there's all these mental difficulties that come with being elite athletes. So just having somebody to go through a workout and not having to like grind every day can make a huge difference. And then there's also just the idea that as much as you can push yourself, and as much as there is a benefit to pushing yourself, most of the time you're going to be able to train harder if you're training with somebody else. That could just be if you're doing interval work, like every other even if it's just one other person, every other interval you're taking the lead, the next person, your running buddy's taking the lead, etc. Like that can be that can help you elevate your workouts to a point that you just can't do by yourself. And so there are definitely some benefits even for elite athletes, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's cool to hear that perspective because I think it's really transformed a lot of groups. You hear about groups like, Tin Man Elite and the groups up in E10 Kenya that will train together, and they're so successful collectively.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there are definitely some downsides. So, I think it's important as an elite athlete, and I would say that this applies to recreational runners as well, is that you do need to choose your group carefully, or at least, like I said, go into the group workout understanding what your objective is. And so, having been a part of some pretty big elite training groups, it is pretty common for athletes to go over their skis, or to run harder, train harder, do more volume than they should because they're in that group. And so it is important to make sure that you're still attacking like the physiological principles of your training, of your workouts, like what you're hoping to accomplish, and again adapting that to the group, and not letting the group take control of like what your effort is or what your mileage is, etc.
Yeah, I think that's a good message to keep in mind if you are training in groups. Now, as we get into trying to extract as many benefits as you can out of these group training runs, I think it's pretty clear that some types of runs maybe suit themselves a bit better to training in groups than others. Are there any that jump to mind as being more favorable to running with other people?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think all of them have so like if I broke down runs, you could have like, easy recovery runs, you could have long runs, threshold workouts, interval workouts. I think all of them are, I shouldn't say equal, well, equal in the sense that they all have benefits to them. So I don't think there's any one of those particular runs that doesn't have any benefits. So I think we've probably already hit on a lot of them. But like for easy runs and long runs, it's just the idea of just spending that time, having it go by a lot faster, and just being in good conversation, etc. And then workouts, intervals, or tempo runs, just having somebody else to help you stay on pace, push the pace, get through those the grinding part of workouts. So there's benefits to all the types of runs. I don't think there's necessarily one that's better than the other.
So, say you're doing like a longer tempo threshold run where not everyone is at the same pace. How do you recommend that athletes adapt to still make sure that they're doing the proper workout?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that the two variables you can probably manipulate the easiest are volume and either rest or pace. So if you're somebody that I'm gonna approach these mostly from the idea of being the group being a little bit faster than you are. I would say maybe when I'm done, but I would say most of the time, if you're faster than the group, you can probably just reverse apply these. Um, but basically, the way would be to cut the volume. So let's say you're doing a track workout and the group is a little bit faster, and they're doing maybe mile repeats, something like that. Um, then you can do 1,200-meter repeats. So that should, or maybe 800-meter repeats, but whatever that the distance you cut off is, should be enough to allow you to run that pace at the effort that you would need to be able to do, but stay with the group. And just because you're running less volume or the interval distance is less, it should allow you to stay with the group and still match the effort that you're looking to get out of the workout. Same thing with tempo runs. Like you could do something where you cut back the volume. So instead of doing 6 miles, you do 4 miles. You could do something where you take some rest, either additional rest if it's an interval workout. So you could do like every other interval with somebody. So they run, let's say you're doing 400s. They could do 400. You could do one together. They do one alone. You do one, that kind of thing. With tempo runs, you could break up a tempo run to do something like instead of 6 miles straight, do 2 times 3 miles, something like that. So at least you're getting some of the volume with the group. So there's a lot of different ways. You just kind of have to get creative sometimes with like how it will work given what you're looking to accomplish, what the workout is, and like where you are.
Yeah, and I think too, being smart about the way you manipulate your workout with a group. So I'll use the example of like the 6 mile straight versus the 2 by 3 mile that you said.
Mm-hmm.
I've done something similar to that with a group, and it can be pretty demoralizing if you just drop off and you have to do that second 3 miles on your own. But say you do like an out and back and the group goes a little bit past you, you can do pretty much 99% of the workout still with the group.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, that's what I mean with being creative. Like you just have to think about, what your route is, what your actual pace is. It does take some work, but I would say that the work that you have to put into it is worth the effort to be able to run with a group. And I would say another big benefit of groups that we haven't touched upon yet is just like the friendships that you make in those groups usually transcend just like running. So I would say that most of the people that I was friends with in the running group, I became friends with outside of the running group as well. And so, there becomes a big benefit that is a benefit that transcends. And that's one of those reasons that it makes adjusting your workouts worth it because, you get to run more with your friends.
Yeah, I'm thankful you brought that one up because we spent so much time talking about manipulating your training to optimize it and being able to push hard on workouts when I would probably guess that the number one reason people run in groups is because it's just more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that gets back to like the taking out the grind part, but you're right. It is a lot of fun. Especially like you said, as the first probably couple weeks, couple months you're in a group, it's probably a little bit intimidating. You kind of got to get used to the dynamics, etc. But I would say then after that transition period, like you start to really look forward to meeting up with the group because it's a time that you get to spend with your friends. So for sure.
I love that. That's so wholesome. And workout wise, so we talked a little bit about a tempo run. Are there any examples of workouts you have that you really like to do with training groups, either that you recommend to your athletes or maybe even that you did yourself as an athlete?
Yeah, so I think anything where you can do so if like you were controlling a group or if you had the ability to like I guess control the dynamics of the group, like I think anything you can do on shorter loops really helps everybody adapt to like what they're able to do for their workouts. Either shorter loops or like out and backs stuff where it's a lot easier to adjust everybody's workout for what they need to do. So as an example, if you're doing a tempo run and you say, well, this loop is 6 miles and we're going to do a 6 mile tempo, like it can be a little hard for somebody to adjust what they may need to do to fit that in. Or if you do like a 20-mile long run and it's just a 20-mile loop, like it's pretty hard. Like if you only need to do 16, you really can just do 8 and then 8 out and then back. So you really miss half the run. So anytime you can do something with loops or multiple ways for people to either cut off the distance or adjust the workout can really help.
Yeah, I find the loop is helpful too, even if you're doing completely different workouts. I don't know if you find this too, but there's something about just being around people, even if you're not running with them, that seems to still capture some of that effect of running in a group.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I got back. I think when I first mentioned, I think you asked what was the benefit of doing the group if you're not doing the whole workout with them. And that's really what it comes down to. Like if you've ever run with a group before, you know that even if you just like did your warm up and like pre-workout like strides and stretches and that kind of stuff with the group and then had to do like the workout mostly on your own, like there's still a benefit to that because even during the warm up you get to talk about kind of how the workout's going to go, what you're doing, what they're doing, you get some motivation. Even if you have to do the workout alone, when you're done you get to do the cool down with them, so you get to kind of commiserate with how hard this interval was, or share your experience if somebody's doing this race and that you've already done before, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of benefits to it, even if you have to modify it enough that you're not doing a lot of the entire workout with the group itself.
Yeah, and when it comes to that, like modifying a bit of pace or rest or those elements, is there one you favor over the other? Let's use the example of somebody who's the faster one in the group, and as you said, you can kind of reverse engineer it. But would you suggest that they try to pick up the pace a little bit versus, well, I guess it wouldn't be pick up the pace. Should they maybe slow down a bit and then extend their volume, or should you do the other piece and maybe play around with your rest?
Yeah, so you really both ways have advantages. I would say it really kind of depends on what the situations of the group are, but I would say that you can probably manipulate the rest the easiest to probably get what you want. So like if you wanted to stay with the group the entire time, you could probably manipulate the rest or volume the easiest to still get the benefits of the workout that you were doing. Pace wise, that can be the most difficult thing, because if you're either too slow or too fast, like you're automatically not running with the group. So I would say adjusting either the rest or the total volume to still get in the work that you need with that while staying with the group as long as you can.
Okay. And in terms of like pushing hard, I think most of us are probably going to be working just a little bit harder if you're in a group. That's part of getting the most out of yourself, but there's a line there. As you said, you don't want to be going beyond the intent of the workout. So how do you strike that balance when you're running with other people to make sure that you're pushing yourself at just the right level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I ultimately decided on, or like I remember when I had this revelation, for lack of a better word, when I was training with groups, was I would think to myself during the workout itself, am I pushing because I am trying to get the best out of myself, or like I know I can go harder, or etc., like, or I know I need to in order to hit the effort level that I want, paces, etc., or am I pushing because I want to stay with the group, and egotistically or whatever it is, like I don't want to back off. For me, that really worked. I was able to mentally make that distinction of when I was like ego pushing or ego running harder than I needed to, versus running as hard, like using the group to elevate the effort that I was able to put in. And so if you're able to do that, I would say that's the method that worked for me, was in the moment thinking, am I egotistically trying to keep up with the pace here? Or is it that I want to push this hard, like this is what I need to do in order to get better? So that's what worked for me. I'm not, maybe you can share your experience to if you think that would work for you, or, like what you've done similarly or not similarly to adjust your training.
Yeah, I think what you said to me, it resonates as effective. And yet, just for me personally, I think it would be really hard in the middle of a hard workout to evaluate, like, am I being egotistical and trying to push myself in that way? I think one thing I've done is just trying to pre-plan with friends kind of what their pace goals are. And, even if you push too hard. Usually it's kind of proportionately so, and you can adjust from there. But
Mhm.
um, I guess the other thing is just a mindset of trying to be honest with yourself. And I guess this is kind of what you were getting at already. But going into the workout, knowing maybe um, I need to be I need not careful. You know, you don't want to feel like you're walking on glass, but going into it knowing I need to be intentional, and this is the purpose of the workout and how I should be feeling during it is kind of, I think, a good mental prep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was probably what allowed me to make that decision on the fly, like during the workout itself, was I knew what my effort needed to be going in, and so and I would say that there's some workouts that are more malleable to effort. So, for example, like if you're doing a tempo run or a threshold effort, you should probably stick within your pace range. So, once you get outside of your pace range, you probably know you're working too hard. So, like that's a pretty immediate feedback. Whereas, like track workouts, something like that, like those are generally workouts where you can probably, the effort can be harder than maybe what you had uh, like on paper. And so, yeah, like you said, kind of going in with that mental idea of like, okay, and this workout in particular, it's a threshold run. Like I'm trying to practice marathon pace or like be in marathon effort. Like I can't go faster than this. So as soon as the time says it is, or the my pace says this is what it is. This is when I have to back off. Whereas if you're on the track, you may be able to use that group to push yourself a little bit more than you might normally be able to.
Yeah, one of the reasons I really love that approach is because that's actually the way that I've been working with my coach to go into races. It used to be when I started working with her that I would get a pace range, but now she kind of just tells me, don't go beyond this pace until a certain point. It's almost just like a cap before you then, when you get to mile 20 of a marathon or mile 10 of a half marathon, let yourself go if you have that little bit in reserve. And I found it to be quite effective.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why, like with Runners Connect, when we assign training plans, like we always give a pace range, and certain workouts have a bigger pace range than others, just based on like what the physiological um, elements are of that workout, like how much leeway we have. But that's why there's always a pace range. It's not just like you know runs 9 minute pace. It's 9 minutes to 9:20, depending on what the workout is. But because there's a lot of variance there for how you're feeling, if you're running with people, what the conditions are, all that kind of stuff. So absolutely, I think everybody needs to go into that to workouts with that mindset. Like there is a range, and we always recommend athletes starting on the slower range. This is kind of getting outside of the group talk, but like um, starting with the slower range and then only incrementally increasing your pace as you feel better. And it doesn't have to get up to as fast as it can. That's like the speed limit kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a little bit outside the scope, but I think maybe another element of training runs is even during races. Like you have kind of formal pace groups if you have like a bunny or something like that, or maybe you decide to run with friends. I think that's kind of an interesting one too, in terms of knowing your pace range and, being aware of the fact that generally there's at least somebody in the group that's going to go out too fast or slow and being able to adjust from there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely that benefit of running with groups being good practice for racing, where there's a lot of people around you, some running faster, some running slower, and so just being able to get in that mindset of like not necessarily worrying about what others around you are doing in a race and focusing on yourself can be really something you practice during a workout itself.
Yeah. And what's your perspective on drafting? Because we know in a race that, especially on a windy day, if you can tuck in behind somebody, it's beneficial to you. But during a workout where the intent of it is to get the most stimulus possible, is it beneficial to draft and get that extra speed, or are you better off intentionally letting yourself have that extra wind resistance?
Yeah, so the way I've always approached it, especially in a group setting, is that like you want everybody to share equally. So what we always did is in workouts like that is we'd kind of switch off. So somebody would bear the brunt of the wind resistance for X amount of time, and then we'd switch, or maybe it's one interval, somebody does it. So that's like probably with a group, that's probably one of the best benefits is that on when days where the conditions aren't ideal, you can have somebody that's in charge of breaking the wind or setting the pace, so you don't have to think about it. You just kind of get in line and follow the group, and then when it's your turn, you have to mentally focus, you have to pay attention, you have to do all those things that you need to execute on race day as well. So you kind of get practice both ways, where that's an example of where the group running in a group can elevate your performance, because the conditions, if you had done it alone, might have prevented you from executing or running as fast as you could for every interval. And with that group, you're able to do that.
Yeah, and I think you see, again, going back to the elites, they have kind of this almost coordination among them, where mid-rep they seem to just be able to fall back like you do in short track speed skating, and in a really neat formation for wind resistance. But when you're looking at more, I don't want to say amateur, but like everyday athletes, it's tough in part because not everyone is at the same fitness level, and so it tends to be the faster runners or the guy who wants to go out hot that leads. So how do you maybe make sure that you have that balance where people are taking turns leading?
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, that always comes from kind of beforehand. So before the workout starts, so just having a quick discussion with everybody. Hey, what's everybody doing for paces? Okay, we're all in the same pace range. So let's say the four of us. Why don't we do this? Why don't you take the first mile? I'll take the second, third, fourth, etc. So like a lot of it comes just down to planning. Elites are, you're right. Elites are able to do it a little bit more on the fly, just because of it's just a talent. I'd say part of it is a talent, just like shooting a free throw would be. But for recreation or like less experienced athletes, it would just be about planning beforehand. Hey, we're all running about the same pace. How about you take the first one, etc., and go from there.
Yeah. Jeff, to kind of give a last thought of advice for runners who are listening to this and maybe do part of the run solo and part of them in groups, if you've given your athlete a training plan and they come to you and say, hey, I know you scheduled this run for me on Friday, but the group is doing these 400-meter repeats and I really want to join them, what's generally your advice to them in terms of striking that balance?
That's a great question, because we get it all the time. So there are two ways when we look at it, we analyze two things. The first part is, where are you in your training cycle? So the earlier you are in the training cycle, the more flexible you can be with your workouts. So at least the way we structure training with like Runners Connect is that until you're about, depending on your experience level, anywhere from 10 to 16 weeks before your race, we consider that like the race specific period. And so that's when the workouts become a little bit more important to be specific, at least to the objectives of that particular workout. Once you get outside of that window, we're in kind of like what we call like a generalized or a build-up part of training. And that's when we can be a little more flexible. So if an athlete comes to us and they're in the build-up phase of their training or in the general side of their training, more than likely we'll just say, yeah, go ahead and swap it out. We'll put that tempo run in another time, etc. If it's completely different workouts kind of thing. Once you're within that like 10 to 14 week window, if it's a workout that is completely opposite of like what we had planned. So for example, this one would be extreme, but let's say you're training for a marathon and you said, oh, I want to go to my group run, but they're doing 400-meter workout intervals and you're 12 weeks out from the race. More than like as a good coach, you have to say, you're more than welcome to do what you want to do. It's your running, etc. But that's definitely not the best way. That's definitely not going to help you the most for training for your marathon. So my recommendation would be to do the workout as planned. Maybe try to find another day to run with your group. If it's something that's a little bit more, I guess, in the same range of what you're trying to do. So for an example, taking that same person, if they're training for a marathon 12 weeks out and the group that they're trying to do is doing mile repeats, something like that, then we could possibly say, okay, well, let's take the workout and turn it, that track workout, et cetera, and turn it into like some type of threshold session. So keep your the pace in the 10K to 15K pace range. We give them specific paces, but take shorter rest so that it remains a threshold. You still get to go to the workout, still get to do the workout with the majority of the group, but we're still keeping it within the range that that'll benefit you towards your upcoming race. So I hope that was clear. It's always sometimes hard to just talk about those things without like visualizing them on a board or paper. But that's kind of how we've always approached it. Most of the time, there's things we can do to adjust the workout to fit like what we're looking for, unless it's just something that's completely off the spectrum in terms of like completely different goals for that particular workout.
Yeah, and I think the mile workout one is a good example that you raised, because it's a track speed session, but also if you're doing any more than 2 or 3 mile repeats, it's probably pretty close to your threshold pace anyways. So to just dial it back a bit is not going to dramatically change the pace range from what you're doing with your friends if they're a similar fitness level.
Right, exactly. You can manipulate that a little bit to get what you need to do. Take a lot shorter rest. Let's say you're taking a much shorter rest, you might be able to do the first lap while your group is still resting, and then you catch up with the group as they start their second, as they start their next interval. So you're still doing the majority of the workout. You're just taking so much less rest that you're getting in something like that. So there's definitely things you can do, and like I said, unless it's something like way outside of like the objectives of the workout that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to keep that in mind. I think it's that time of year right now where I think a lot of athletes are coming off of either marathons or other spring races, and now it's kind of the perfect time for training groups when you're not in the thick of training, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. This is the best time because there's a lot more variability. If like you said, if you have a workout schedule and the group is doing something completely different, more than likely, unless you have a race coming up right away, like you can adapt your training to fit that in. So definitely one of the best times. Spring is coming, so more people are getting out. If you're able to run in the evenings, the daylight's even in the mornings, the daylight's starting to get a little bit longer now. So definitely a lot of opportunities. So absolutely, if you've been thinking about a group and you haven't tried one yet, definitely now is probably the best time.
Awesome. Jeff, are you getting in any runs this time of year? And if you are you doing them mostly solo or in groups?
I'm doing mostly mine solo these days, but definitely loving the extended daylight. So this is always this is always my favorite time of year because it's not hot yet, and yet the time, the daylight is so much more that definitely enjoying it.
Yeah, you're so right. I have a group that meets up at 5:30 a.m. typically on Fridays, and it kind of sucks when it's cold and dark, and it's so
Yeah.
nice now to actually have daylight at that time.
Yeah, and there's no ice, so it's just like one of those things. It's like, oh, it's so much nicer.
Yeah, it doesn't really lend itself to workouts in the winter time when there's black ice everywhere and you can't see anything. But in the summer and spring, it's a little bit nicer.
Absolutely.
Sweet, awesome. Thank you, Jeff. I know we actually put this podcast together somewhat last minute because we had to reschedule. But yeah, I'm really glad we could share a little bit of insights on training in a group, and I think super helpful, especially as we said this time of year. It's really the perfect time to get out and find a new training group or club to run with. So hopefully runners get a lot of insights out of this.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was great chatting with you, and I hope everybody enjoyed.
Thanks, Jeff.